Today's topic is the best time to sell your business. And one of the most frequent conversations we have on a regular basis is, when is the best time to sell my business? And with that conversation, I think we've all probably had this conversation with another advisor, or maybe it's ourselves if we look in the mirror, and heard the advisor that says, yeah, I'm thinking about selling in the next 2 to 5 years. And you ask them in a year and 2 years and 3 years down the line, and it's the exact same answer. Yeah, I'm thinking about selling in the next 2 to 5 years. And that is typically somebody that is probably financially there. They're ready, right? And emotionally, they're probably not. And it's that aspect of, what am I going to do with my time? And in their mindset, it is, hey, I could stay in the business, work for another year, take the income from the business, and then I'll have the value in 1 year and I can sell it then, right? And in a good market, well, we've had, 9 years of bull market here, as it's going up, that oftentimes works. They're usually right. But it's the down markets, it's the RMDs, it's the clients passing away that tend to affect that in a negative aspect. And what we have found is that a lot of advisors who think along those lines are half checked out anyways and not working to grow the book. So what they're doing, especially if there's a down market, is working for free, right? Hey, I'm going to work another year and have lower income because my expenses are what they are and my revenue is starting to fall exponentially if there's a market drop. And then in a year, what happens to the value of their business, right? It is also going down because the clients are getting older, there's RMDs that are happening, or, hey, market tanked 40% and your value just dropped 40%. So what we thought we'd do today is really talk about why we are seeing the greatest time to sell a business now that we've ever seen before. So today you're going to have two experts talking with you. My ugly mug's on the right. I'm Eric. And then we have Kristen, my partner in crime. She helps her and I team up and deal with most of the third-party sales that go through Succession Resource Group. So you'll be hearing from both of us. Succession Resource Group, obviously, the hope here today would be that you find out we are experts in what we do and we know what we're talking about. Across the board, between Kristen and I and the team here, we've seen over 1,000 transactions, 1,000 buys and sells across the board, plus over 6,000 valuations. So we've seen a lot of data run through on transactions across the board. And Kristen's going to come on in a little bit later and talk about the last two portions of the agenda, the effective strategies to sell your business and industry trends and predictions. So what is going to be happening going forward from this point. But what we really wanted to start off with is, why now? Why is now the optimal time to sell? And what the values are, which is kind of part of why now. So without further ado, let's kind of jump into it. Now, there are 5 conglomerative factors right now that are driving why now is the best time we've ever seen to sell your business. And this is the main piece that we promised you for this webinar here. But since I jumped in this industry in 2001 till now, it has been a seller's market. It has been a seller's market because there's always been more buyers than sellers. But at no point have these 5 factors come together in the same way. So right now, and you'll see in the next couple slides, values are at all-time highs. Stock market is towards the top of the market. Inventory right now for sellers is low, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. Buyer demand is high, and right now we have readily available financing that tends to be easy for buyers to get at low interest rates. So we're going to talk a little bit more about those, but those 5 factors are all pooling together to drive the best time we've ever seen to be able to sell a business. So this first slide, what I wanted to point out is a question about the inventory, right? So we've all heard the studies, older advisors, hey, everybody's getting old, but what's to quantify? How do we put numbers to that? So number one, there are 311,305. And actually, Michael Kitces and Cerulli put that together because there are over 600,000 registered people. But if you whittle it down and you get rid of administrative assistants and compliance people and home office and all of that, how many advisors are there? And so what they came up with is 305,000. Now, number two, though, 50% of those advisors are over 55. Over 55. Now, historically, and Kristen can tell you as well, when we talk to sellers about who their ideal candidate is to be a buyer, those are usually advisors that are in early to mid 40s, right? Have enough experience that the clients will actually take them seriously, but young enough where maybe they're going to be in the industry for 30 years and take care of the client, right? So most of these 55 are not going to be buyers for most sellers. Now, there's caveats to that if they've got juniors or family members and things like that. But let's move to number three. Number three, 38%, according to Cerulli, 38% of the advisors are planning to retire in the next 10 years. There's a huge number of advisors that are going to be exiting this business. And number four, 10%, only 10, are under the age of 35. So if you think about that, in 5 to 10 years, those are the buyers. Those are the guys that are going to be in their early 40s. And they will be the pool that will be buying candidates. And if that's only 10% of the industry, the buyer-to-seller ratios are going to change, right? So that inventory is going to go up, and there's going to be less buyers that are going to be in the equation. Now, let's piggyback that with access to capital, okay? Now, I've got it here, 58 to 1 in blue there, but that's our average buyer-to-seller ratio, i.e., the number of buyers that when we represent a seller are interested in each seller. Now, obviously, if you're in the middle of nowhere, Alaska, it's probably a lot less. If you're in the middle of New York City, it's probably a lot more. But on average, that's about what we see. So pretty good buyer-to-seller ratio in terms of a seller's mind, right? So good time to sell from that standpoint. Now, financing has totally changed how deals get done. And what it has done is it has allowed more buyers to be able to buy businesses because they're using capital that's not out of their own pocket, right? They didn't have to save up for a down payment. So a lot of the lenders now are doing 100% financing. And the benefit there is when you had an old seller finance deal, you might have 3, 4, 5 years to finance the business, right? That's what you'd have to pay the seller over. The lender gives you 10 years to pay them back. And as you can see, interest rates on that bottom right, pretty low, right? We're still prime under 6, but it's starting to tick up, right? But in the grand scheme of things, it is still pretty low in the history of interest rates since what I think I put up till 1955 on there. So we have readily available financing, and the interest rates are low in the grand scheme of things. So the cost of that capital is low, and they get 10 years to pay it back. So that conglomerative of the financing being in there is increasing that pool of buyers for now. That interest rate continues to rise, or the inventory continues to go up, that may change. And then the last two are values at all-time highs, and our stock market's really high, right? Values, as you can see on that recurring multiple bucket on the bottom left there. You go back to 2013, and that's really when the lenders first stumped in our space. In 2013, average multiple was 2.39. Now, last year, 2.68 on the recurring side of the fence. You know, and as Kristen will show you here in a minute, when there's an advocate or an expert that is actually advocating on your behalf, you usually get a much better deal than that. But this is a conglomerative of all deals. So if you think about values at the highest, stock market towards the top end, right? Most people, after 9 years of bull market, are probably thinking it's going the other direction. Plus easy lending sources for buyers, great buyer-to-seller ratio for a seller, and inventory really low. Now is a great time, probably the best that I've seen all the way back to 2001, even though it's been a seller's market the whole time, to actually sell your business. Now, how do you take advantage of that? Some effective strategies. Kristen's going to jump in here and talk about some effective strategies on how to take advantage of this conglomerative of factors.
Thanks, Eric. So there's 4 key effective strategies to sell your business. The first, think, understand, explore. So what does that mean? The whole idea here is think about what that post-sale life looks like to you. What are you going to do once you've retired? What are your goals for the sale? Or alternatively, think about what the ideal buyer candidate looks like for you. Are they a particular age? As Eric mentioned, that early to mid 40s. Do they have a certain number of years of experience, designations? Do they have a certain client service model that you want to emulate? Next, understand your options. What would be the ideal price and terms for your practice? Are you willing to take on more risk for a higher price tag? Or would you prefer to mitigate your risk? Do you want to retire immediately? Or do you want to stay on? And if you stay on, in what capacity? Next, explore. How can you make this sale a reality without sacrificing fit, price, terms, or your client relationships? This process seems simple, right? But if you don't identify these terms early on, then usually what we see happening is that you waste your time, you talk to the wrong people, and you get a bad fit, and it hurts your value. So next is the effective strategy to expand your outreach. Widen your reach and expand your network. We do this through reaching out to our contacts, such as broker-dealer home office personnel, custodians, third-party asset managers, wholesalers, lenders, coaches, consultants, and our qualified buyer list. It's not a short-term endeavor. It takes a long time to build this list up. The key here is not to have conversations with that one buyer who you've known for 20 years. Include them in the process, of course. Evaluate your options, see if they're truly a good fit, and they very well may be. But you're not going to know that unless you've evaluated your other options and explored it thoroughly. Next, interview. Evaluate these buyers. Do these people meet the criteria that you previously set? Do they check all of the boxes? When you see them, do you trust them? Would you give your assets to them when you retire? Or would you want to give your assets to some other buyer or advisor down the street? Do they have that wow factor? Do you think your clients are going to want to meet with them? These are all the things that you should be narrowing down to identify that one true buyer. Not only for the fit, which tends to be, sellers' number one criteria, but also to make sure the transition is as successful as it can be. And number 4, solicit advice. You don't have to do this on your own. Hire a neutral third-party perspective, not only for the advice and the industry knowledge that someone like us can provide, but to help finalize the deal and see it all the way through, to get access to resources so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel. It doesn't have to be in an advocacy situation. We can work with you in several different aspects. Continuing on that same line of thinking, we want to share some data on those who did it themselves, the DIYers, versus those who sought representation. As Eric mentioned, the facts and the data speak for themselves. Based on our data for 2018, those who were represented had the following quantitative benefits. They had a higher down payment, 76% there, a higher value, the sellers paid less in taxes, and the sellers received their money faster. But let's make this a little bit more real. Let's say that there was a practice for $1 million, GDC. That practice could sell for, on average, with a DIY approach, $2.4 million. Alternatively, a represented seller, through our seller advocacy program as an example, would be at $3.1 million. That's a difference of $670,000 for the exact same practice. When would you ever give up $670,000? Combine that with the fact that you're going to be receiving 40% more of your sales price up front and more of your money in less than 1 year versus 5 years in a DIY approach. That's unheard of. More than this, what we found is our sellers through the seller advocacy program tend to have the best fit. I'll give you an example of one of our recent sellers. He brought to the table 4 buyers who he'd been working with for over a year. They checked some of the boxes. He thought that they had something special that they brought to the table in some instances, but they didn't meet all of his expectations. We brought him to the table, and by leveraging our experience and our qualified buyer pool, we were able to add more better qualified buyers who ultimately ended up writing significantly better offers than the 4 that he originally brought to the table. Instead, he chose one who not only wowed him in terms of a fit perspective, but also a financial package. And not only that, but they wowed his clients. They're currently expected to transition 100% of the assets 3 months earlier than anticipated. So what does that mean for the predictions and what we think the future holds? Assuming everything stayed equal, down payments will continue to stay high through the use of capital that's available and more lenders entering the space. The seller volume we expect to stay high with a 58-to-1 ratio, as Eric mentioned. And we think the practice values, if everything is held equal, will continue to increase with a 4-to-1 offer per seller ratio. But if there's a market correction, or if the advisor population continues to get older, we can expect that it will no longer be a seller's market and there will be less demand, inevitably resulting in less value per your practice. The one thing we do know is that what goes up must come down, and that stock market isn't going to stay high forever. The key takeaway here is that if you're contemplating retirement or phasing out in the next 5 years, now is probably the right time, and SRG can help you to develop strategies so that you understand what your options are. It can be as simple as selling and retiring, or selling and working with the buyer for some period of time. Thank you for taking the time to join us today on this short webinar. We encourage you to subscribe to our newsletter and follow or like us on our social media channels, as we're consistently putting out new content and practices for sale. For a more comprehensive overview on the things SRG can help you with, please see our services on the left and our contact information on the right. Nicole Sinclair will be following up with you after this webinar to address any of your questions. But as always, please do not hesitate to reach out to us. We'd be more than happy to answer any of your questions. Thank you again for your time today.